As everybody knows, these classes are recorded and they're uploaded to YouTube, the Kabbalah Decoded channel. Just look for Kabbalah Decoded if you want a recording. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity, which I have neglected to do in previous classes, just take this opportunity to thank everybody who, out of the kindness of their hearts, helps this channel by donating something, whatever it is. Much appreciated. And I'm sorry that I neglected to mention it in previous classes. Again, many thanks. It is greatly appreciated. All right. We will now begin the class in Sefer Yetzirah 1.7. I don't think we're going to finish it tonight, but we will start at least 1.7. Let me share with you the English translation, the original Hebrew and the English translation, and we will take it from there. Okay, so it says like this: 10 sfirot of nothingness. Oh, sorry, let me read the Hebrew first. Es sfirot blima, the 10 sfirot of nothingness. Blima means without substance. Naot sofan bitchilatan. The end is wedged in the beginning. Bitchilatan besofan, and the beginning in the end. Now I'm going to explain this at length, but there are two versions of this. There are two versions of the way this states it. One states the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning in the end, and the other way states it the opposite way around. The beginning is wedged in the end and the end in the beginning. I'm going to explain the difference when we get there, as soon as we start analyzing it. Kashalhevet kashura bagachelet, like a flame bound up in a coal. And I'll explain this also. What do we mean when we say a flame bound up in a coal? Is that the flame on top of the coal? Is it the flame inside the coal, the burning coal inside, etc.? We will discuss that as we go along. Sha'adon yachid, that the one master, va'en lo sheni, who has no second, in other words, God. V'lifnei echad ma'ata sofer, and before one, what can you count? Before one, what can you count? There's one master, there's no other, and before one, what do you count? What can you count? As you see, the translation here in the English is slightly different from the way I translated it, but nevertheless, it's more or less the same concept. I would like now to start explaining this Mishnah. Let me just go right back to the beginning, where the Mishnah says as follows again: 10 sfirot blima, the 10 sfirot without substance. We've discussed this whole chapter deals with the 10 sfirot without substance, where exactly they are, what they are, and so on and so forth. We've discussed this in previous classes. The 10 sfirot without substances are essentially, according to some commentaries anyway, the sfirot of the world of Atzilut, and according to other commentaries, even higher than that, much higher than the world of Atzilut, either the 10 sfirot in the Kav or the 10 sfirot in the Or Ein Sof, before the contraction, before the Tzimtzum. There's various ways of explaining it. I don't want to go into it again because we discussed it in previous classes. But what I do want to discuss is the two versions of this Mishnah. One version says the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning in the end. That's the one I'm going to explain first. And the other one, which says the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning in the end. So, in other words, the basic difference between them is that the first one talks about the end first being wedged in the beginning, and the second one talks about the beginning first being wedged in the end. Okay, so why is this important? Isn't it just a perhaps slightly different versions with no nafkamina, no difference between them, no indicative difference between them? Now, I'll have to tell you that the most common version of it is that the end is wedged in the beginning first, and then the beginning is wedged in the end. That's the most common way of speaking about it. But I'm going to start off at the other end. Why? I will explain now. The first way, when we say that the beginning is wedged in the end, what are we talking about? Essentially, we're talking about the sfirot, the divine emanations, the way they become manifested from top down. It's a top-down manifestation from the very highest levels all the way through to the very lowest levels. The beginning is wedged in the end. This is what is called in Kabbalistic literature, this is what is called Or Yosher, the light of Yosher. Yosher means the straight line, so to speak. In other words, the descent of the Sfirot in the process that is known as Seder Hishtalshalut, the chaining down of being, from the very highest spiritual levels all the way through to the very lowest of levels. That's called Or Yasher. In other words, the manifestation, if we would put it in these terms, the manifestation of godliness on the very high, the divine creativity, the divine power of creation from the very highest levels all the way through down to the lowest levels. How does this work? Well, it works in a process, as I said, called Hishtalshalut. Hishtalshalut is from the Hebrew word shalshelet. Shalshelet means a chain. So there's a chaining down of divine energy. Now, what does this mean? The way it's explained in the Kabbalistic literature is that the lowest, like a chain has links, right? And all the links are obviously linked together as to form a single chain. But the lowest level of the upper link becomes that where the highest level of the next link down of the lower link are attached. The lowest level of the higher link and the highest level of the lower link are attached. And so it goes on down through a process of descent all the way, cause and effect, all the way through to the end of the chain. So therefore, when we start off talking about that the beginning is wedged in the end, we're talking about the descent of divine energy all the way through the process of creation. Now, this is not the case with the creation of what is called the world of Tohu, the world of chaos. The world of chaos is not created in the same kind of way in a process of Hishtalshalut, the chaining down of being. Every level over there is equal to every other level, and therefore it's one huge mess, essentially. The world of Tohu is the world of chaos. Translated in English, they translate it usually as the world of chaos. Chaos means that every level is not dependent on the previous level. Every level is independent of the previous level. And therefore, all of them are shouting out, I want to be the king, I want to be the king. Those are the sfirot, the emanations in the world of Tohu, that every aspect, every manifestation regards itself, so to speak, as the king. These are the 7 kings of Tohu, or the 7 kings of Edom, as the verse says, the beginning in the first chapter of Genesis, that these were the kings of Edom, Vayimloch, Vayamat. Each king lived and he ruled and then he died. Why? Because without being able to embrace its opposite, and the Sfirot of Tohu could not embrace the opposite quality, without being able to embrace the opposite, they were not able to continue because their light just sort of dissipated eventually. Right? If it's the light, let's say the light of Chesed, the light of Chesed can only go so far. If it doesn't have Gvura with it, limiting it and therefore forming a third entity, Tiferet, it's not possible for any of them, for any of the Sfirot of Tohu to last. So the Sfirot of Tohu last for a certain amount of time and then they sort of die out, like a light bulb. It's sort of bright for a while and then it dies out. Okay, so this whole concept is not, this concept of the chaining down of being is not a concept that works in the world of Tohu. It only works in the world of Tikkun, where you have what's called Partzufim. Partsufim, literally translated visages. But what that means is that there are clusters of sfirot that work in harmony with different aspects to them. In other words, different sfirot are dominant in different clusters, but that's how they work. They work in the way of a harmonious interaction of various forces to produce whatever it is that they produce, whereas the Sfirot of Tohu only worked as independent dots of light, independent, pure, very high energy light, but since they were only one type of light, they weren't suitable for every situation. And you find that there are people like that as well. You get very brilliant, sometimes very brilliant people. They're particularly brilliant in one particular sphere of action, let's say in mathematics or something like that, but they're completely incompetent in any other thing. They, like, you know, they can't drive a car or in other words, they sort of very bright in their thing, and the rest of their life is misery because they can't deal with the rest of the world. They can't deal with it. I'm sure we all know people like that usually very brilliant in their, you know, geniuses, but they're completely socially completely inept or in some other way they're inept, whatever. Okay, so therefore, when we're talking about the concept of the beginning is wedged in the end, we're talking about the descent of the worlds, the descent of the Sfirot, and the purpose for which they were created. In other words, all of those things that were created in the chaining down until the final link in the chain were there purposefully. And all of them are connected in one way or another, maybe by a long chain, but they're all connected to the top. The bottom of the chain is connected to the top. It's all one chain. There's no break in between. The bottom is connected to the top, the middle is connected to the top, and the top is connected to the middle, the top is connected to the bottom, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, when it uses the word na'us tchilatan, the beginning, what do we mean by the beginning? So there's various opinions about this, and there's various explanations. Some of the explanations are that we're talking about the Sfira of Chokhmah, which is connected to Malchut. And that is in fact the case, that Chokhmah is connected to Malchut. But the majority of commentaries say, no, we're not talking about Chokhmah, which is the beginning of imminent creation, but we're talking even about Keter, which is transcendent. Keter is transcendent and Malchut is imminent. So how the transcendent connects to the imminent, that's Keter. And there are other explanations that go even deeper. It's even deeper into Keter, the very highest levels of Keter, and so on and so forth. But they're all connected with Malchut, they're all connected with the lower level, which means essentially, if we break it down, boil it down to its most common denominator, the idea is that God's divinity, Hashem, God, is involved with even the lowest levels of creation. The very lowest level of thing, it's all one chain and it's all connected and it all goes back to the same source. But all of this is the connection of the top to the bottom. Now, what about the connection of the bottom to the top? In other words, what about the na'utz sofan bitchilatan? How the sof, Malchut, is connected all the way up to the top. How does that happen? So the first process from top to bottom is the process of creation, the process of coming into being, coming into physical being, into material being. The other process is the opposite direction. So it's a two-directional thing. The opposite direction means it's going from coarse materiality higher and higher and higher into spirituality. And how is it doing that? In other words, the end is wedged in the beginning, is what is called in Hasidic terminology, it's called avodah. The idea of serving, which means nullifying oneself to the level which is beyond you, or to the levels which are beyond you. Self-nullification, which is necessary in order for one to ascend from one level to the next. If you're full of yourself and you're happy with your level and you're happy with where you are, you will never ascend. You will only remain where you are and perhaps even descend from where you are. There has to be a longing, a longing and a wish, a wishing, I don't know if that's the right word, but a longing to ascend higher. There's a verse in Psalm 63. It's actually became a famous Hasidic song. Tzama lecha nafshi. My soul longs, yearns, thirsts for you with a capital Y. That's what the idea of the movement from below to above accomplishes. The movement from below to above is the idea of seeking out divinity on higher and higher levels. But it must be preceded, according to this version of Sefer Yetzirah, it is preceded by the revelation of divinity in the process of creation. Only what? In the process of creation, divinity is revealed less and less and less. As you get further down the chain, less and less godliness is revealed. In order to get back up to the original source of godliness, you have to reverse the process and go back up the chain. That is all according to the first version. Now, what about the second version? The second version starts with the end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning is wedged in the end. What is that talking about? How is that different? So one of the ways that one can explain this is actually, interestingly enough, through the story of this and next week's Torah readings, Parshiot, the Parshas of this week and next week, where basically what happens is Abraham is living in the desert, and he provides those people living in the desert with water. He provides them with water. One of the things that he does is he gives everybody water. In other words, he pours out his goodness and his kindness and so on and so forth for people to partake of. Isaac, his son, Yitzchak, does exactly the opposite. He doesn't provide the place with water of his own, that he brings the water to the place. He doesn't bring the water to the place from outside. On the contrary, he finds the water in that place itself. In other words, he digs down and he digs wells, and he digs down the deepest that he possibly can in order for the wells to emerge from deep down. So the various Hasidic texts following the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, various Hasidic texts explain that these are two different approaches. The first approach is the pouring down of goodness from above to below. We spoke about that before. And that causes an arousal of wanting to seek and be grateful for and thank he who is giving, he with a capital H, who is giving all of this goodness. But the other version of this Mishnah in Sefer Yetzirah, the version where it starts off with Na'us Sofan B'tchilatan, the end is wedged in the beginning, is a different approach altogether. This is the approach of digging deep to find the godliness that's embedded in everything, not the godliness as it is on the highest level, but the godliness that is buried in everything, that there, where it is, you can find godliness as well. You don't have to leave this place to go to another place. It says that Abraham, one of the first times we meet Abraham, God tells him, go from your place. He was always moving, he's traveling, he's going on, he's moving onwards, he's moving on to where? To the essence of his soul, he's moving on from below to above. But Isaac is not doing that. Isaac, we find, mostly stays in one place. For the most part, he stays in one place and he digs down deep. What's the difference between these two approaches? The first approach, to bring water to a place that needs water, in other words, to a dry place, you're going to bring water, the water of divine teachings, or if you want to put it this way, bring light into the darkness. You bring in light and you bring in light and you bring in more light and so on and so forth, and you flood the darkness with light until the place is lit up. You flood the dryness with water, with life-giving water in order to bring things back to life, in order to make them, in order to satisfy that thirst. But it doesn't actually change the place. It never changes the place. The place remains dry. It's just that it happens to be covered in water right now. But if you don't bring any more water, soon that water is going to run out. It'll all be absorbed, and the place will return to its state of dryness. Whereas Isaac did completely the opposite. Yitzhak, what he did was he dug down deep to reveal the source of water, the wellspring of water within each place itself. And therefore the place was changed. It wasn't that the place remained the same place. It was a different place, because now it was a place that produced water. It wasn't a place that was flooded with water, a place that was watered. It was a place of water, because he dug the wells to bring up the water from the depths. Now, you might argue that actually Abraham also did that. Abraham also dug wells. But one of the things that we're going to see is that in next week's parsha is that the wells that Abraham dug, he did dig some wells, but the wells that he dug were covered up by the Philistines. They were covered up by the Plishtim, right? They were covered up by the Plishtim, the Philistines. In other words, what Philistines always what do Philistines represent? They represent the idea of mockery and making fun of and belittling and so on and so forth. The word Plishtim actually comes from the term mavui mefulash. Mavui mefulash means like a passage, an empty passage, a passage that goes through from one side to the next without anything blocking it in between, like an alleyway, right? An alleyway that goes from one street to the next street. That's what a mavui mefulash is. The Plishtim, the Philistines, were those kinds of people. They were empty, they were hollow people, and therefore they were always mocking everything. And so what they did was they stopped up the wells of Abraham. Why? Because they said, since people are now getting water from Abraham's wells, but they're not buying water from us, therefore we have to stop them, right? They have to buy our water. They can't get the water for free from Abraham's wells. But when Isaac came along, he dug those wells so deep that they weren't able to stop up the wells. They couldn't stop up the wells. He dug such kind of wells that they flowed automatically no matter what. In other words, he changed the place. So the Sefer Yetzirah over here is looking at two different kinds of two approaches to things. To put it in terms of meditation, Jewish meditation, mystical meditation, Kabbalistic meditation, is the meditation on the descent of godliness into the worlds, even to this place where I'm standing now, or is the meditation on the divinity of the very place that I am in and tracing it all the way back? In other words, is it from above to below, or is it from below to above? Both of them have aspects to them, but it depends where you start off, right? Do you start off with the divinity as it comes to the world? Is the meditation on the Seder Hishtalshalut, or is the meditation on the manifestation of godliness in every place, the godliness that transcends the place? Not that is narrowed down and is exactly fitting to this particular place, but the godliness that transcends the place. It's called the Koach HaMakif, right? The overwhelming divine presence that is not limited by anything. It's not limited, not by the creation, not by anything else. And that is the other approach, the approach of from below to above. Let me just take some questions over here. Just 1 second. I lost it. 1 minute. Okay. Oh, there's a lot of questions that I missed. Yeah, it begins at the inner, from above to below begins the inner aspect of Keter and ends with Malchut. The last king, Hadar, did not die because he was part of the tikkun. He was rectified. That was the beginning of the rectification, was from the last king of the 7 kings of Tohu, or the 7 kings of Edom, did not die. That became the beginning of the tikkun. Meitavel, phonetically spelling her name, Hadar's wife, the Edomite kings. Not sure what you're talking about. Oh, May. In other words, the water of Tavel. Yeah, okay. Someone like Jacob was ladder going up and down along the ladder, the angels going down bringing down from heaven, and those then going up, bringing down from below to above. Yes. So beginning to end is akin to the paths of creation. End to beginning is akin to the paths of wisdom. Exactly. Very well put. That's exactly what it is. Beginning to the end, in other words, the chaining down, that's the path of creation. The end to the beginning is the path of wisdom. That's the path of, essentially the path of the inner dimension of Torah. It's the inner dimension of Jewish mysticism. That's basically the way it goes. It's not necessarily concealed and revealed. Both of them become revealed at a certain point in time. The top of the chain is always revealed, and the bottom is, the top of the chain is always concealed, and the bottom of the chain is always revealed. But the path from below to above deals with that godliness that is never revealed. It can't be revealed. It starts off with the wellspring of divine power that is the essence of the soul. Like Goliath, they were mocking us with Philistines. Yeah, that's right. Can't one experience both? Yeah, you can experience both. It's possible to go both paths, but there's actually a very interesting letter from. Actually, I'm sorry, it's not a letter. It's like a note that he wrote for himself. There was a very famous Hasidic rabbi. He wasn't the Rebbe himself. He wasn't a Hasidic leader. He was a Hasidic follower of the first 3 Rebbes of the first 3 how do you say Rebbes? The first 3 rabbis, the first 3 spiritual leaders of the Chabad or Lubavitch movement. His name was the first one was the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi, the author of the Tanya. Then his son, the Middle Rebbe, as it's called, and then the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was the 3rd Lubavitcher Rebbe. So this particular person, whose name was Rabbi Hillel Miparich, Rabbi Hillel of Parich, of the town of Parich, somewhere in White Russia, I believe. But in any event, he was very young in the time of the first Chabad Rebbe, somewhat older in the time of the middle Rebbe, and then he was already a sage himself in the times of the 3rd Rebbe. So he went to the 2nd and the 3rd Rebbe, and he asked them for the proper path in Jewish meditation. And the Mittler Rebbe told him that the first thing that you have to do is you have to go through the entire chain of being from top to bottom all the way through, realizing how each level is nullified to the general divine presence. Now, that kind of meditation takes a very, very long time. And one could be basically meditating all day without managing to even finish, because it's a very difficult and very, very complex path. The Tzemach Tzedek, the 3rd Rebbe, said, given our generation today, that in our generation you have lower souls who are not capable of focusing and concentrating for hours on end. Therefore, my advice is, he told Rabbi Hillel, is to grab a concept that appeals to you, something that's important to you, something that you feel you get a lift out of, a spiritual lift out of, and focus on that and try and implement that concept in your daily life, and figure out while you meditate on how you're going to implement that idea and clarify that idea for yourself. So it's a much different path, but that's the path of below to above. That's the second path, the path of starting off from the bottom and working your way up, rather than from the top and working the way down. It's the path of, as Justin put it, This is the path of, how did you put it exactly? The path of wisdom rather than the path of creation. That's correct. Okay. That's an interesting dream, Terry. So yeah, you're dreaming of the world of Tohu. Tohu and Tikkun. Okay. So that is where we're going to stop tonight. The second half of the class will finish the second half of this Mishnah. We'll just leave it at that because there's what to think about. We could finish it now, but I would rather leave it like that, and then we'll pick it up next time and speak about the conclusion of this Mishnah 1:7. Okay, see you all next week. Any other questions? Okay, very good. All the best, everybody, and we'll see you around next time around. All the best. Oh yeah, there's a class tomorrow. That's right. Yeah, thank you for reminding me, Yael. There will be a class tomorrow, and at least at this point in time, I'm planning on a class tomorrow. Yes. All righty. All the best. Good night.